Look, Brandon and I have the same background.
I was about to say I need to find a festive way to change the background, put some stockings up there and some
That's
Christmas
good.
lights.
You can't have mine. These are mine. My kids will kill you.
I have been known to steal backgrounds from other things. Someone goes out of frame for a second, and I just take a quick screenshot and turn that into my own background.
I can try to help, but yeah.
I was listening, it was a podcast the other day, so I didn't get to see it, but whoever was doing it, they were complaining about everybody that had the bad Zoom backgrounds, and you can always tell. And then apparently one of the people switched his, and they're like, wait, you're not in your office? And he goes, no, I just took a picture of my office, and then I'm downstairs in the basement with a green screen. So everybody was, it's like, you're just 2 floors away, but yeah.
Nice. I'm always in my office. It always looks like I'm in my office.
You always think you're there. Hey, John.
Hey, John.
I should purchase books, it seems.
Everyone's doing it.
Mine are free if you want them.
Oh, perfect. I not only appear illiterate, also am nearly. At least Josh doesn't have the books either. It's not just me.
Never read a book.
Why, when you have HTML, the internet?
I realize how bad I'm getting at reading when someone gives me a link and it's like 3 screens of text. I'm like, no, I don't have time for this.
But all my unread tabs are just like anything that's longer than a page. It's like, I'll get to that one day.
Looks like we're about to get quorum here. Should we get ready to kick this thing off? I'm not sure how much we want to discuss on this versus the one I want to make sure of is if we have any time for discussing what's happening at the working group, because I saw that got approved, but I'll do as best I can to keep mine quick with that in mind. This one, not sure if people saw this over on the distribution spec. And so I wasn't sure how much this was interesting to us. I just kind of thinking through when we have an index that isn't fully populated. And so it points to references to things that should be on that local registry. They're not remote references or something like that with a URL, but it's a reference to a local manifest. And it just doesn't exist on the registry, and they want to say that's a supported case. And there are good reasons for it. I like it myself, but I'm also terrified of what could potentially break when you do that. Because I'd love to be able to set up a mirror and say, you know what, I don't have a mainframe, so I don't need all the S390 images. So let's just not copy all those bytes over the wire. So that would be nice. But I'm thinking of like vulnerability scanners that would scan a partial index and say, hey, it looks good. I didn't see any vulnerabilities. And then someone later on uploads a massively vulnerable manifest that never got scanned and you just didn't know about. So I'm thinking through those kind of scenarios and what could possibly go wrong there, and just kind of want to throw it out to see other people's thoughts on that one. Just make sure that folks are aware of that. Any questions, discussion?
When it says index, is that also applying to just basic manifests as well?
So this is for an index or a manifest list. And what they're saying is they want to be able to sparsely copy individual manifests out from a manifest list or from an index, to not copy all the images, but some of them. Are you thinking of copying just some blobs out from an image and not all the blobs?
Yeah. I guess I'm thinking about it from the conformance side. Like we could very easily try pushing something, with a blob that's missing, but we're not doing anything with indexes or manifest lists right now.
Yeah, I would think it would be something easy enough to add, but I haven't looked at the conformance test.
But that's not what we're talking about. I just want to clarify.
No,
Yeah.
this one was a little bit more interesting in the sense that, and I really like the optimization where I don't have to pull all of them, but there was an interesting assumption around, does a scan result really scan the index, or does it use the index to figure out what it's going to scan below it? So, and even we went through this a little bit with the signing. But the interesting thing related to whether it exists or it's in other locations, we kind of went through this back when we were doing PR27, where we wanted to reference things in other repos, which even in the same registry became a challenge, because the index assumes the content is in the same repo, not even the same registry. At least when I say the index assumes, our implementations that cloud providers have done tend to make that assumption. So I like this scenario. I think it's just a matter of what are we trying, what is the expectation and how do we want to handle it? And then for the scan results, I actually don't think the scan results of an index are interesting. I think the scan results of the things the index references is what's super interesting.
Yeah, I can also see if, from like the UX perspective, and that might come back to where you're saying with the scanning as well. Usually you'll see like a listing of all the tags in the repo, and you see the tag and you see that it's got image for your platform. You say, okay, I can use that, and you start building and trusting it. And then everything starts to come back 404. And so not really a ideal scenario for users when they see something out there and they think they can use it and then find out that it doesn't actually exist on the registry. And similar for the scan is that the scan would have to be a layer down just to make that work. And so you couldn't put a scan at the top level anymore to say this whole thing is scanned. You'd have to say individually, each individual image within it is scanned. And that's extra work for the users to go through that extra layer of indirection themselves.
Would you actually put the scan result at the index? Because what if the ARM has vulnerabilities, but you're using the Linux or Windows, do you care?
I think you would want to be able to go through and dig into it and drill in and see, okay, well, when you look at the individual vulnerabilities, individual layers and whatnot, and that's how a lot of people are going to use the scanners. But I think a lot of users are going to want to see that top level, here's my tag that I want to deploy, and it's trusted, it's signed, it's scanned. And so if that tag is at an index level, I think they want to see that verification at that tag level, wherever that is.
But that's my point. You're actually not deploying the index. You're deploying the architecture specific one.
You're tagging the index usually. And so if you tag the index, that thing that you've tagged is something they want to be able to see. That whole thing that's tagged has been scanned. There's pros and cons all around this, but I just kind of want to throw it out there.
Are we talking about 310 here?
Yes, poll 310.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of like other implications around scanning and whatnot, but this is a mistake in the spec. This is like this is correcting a problem with the spec effectively, right? Like this is not like adding a feature for scanning or anything like that. The manifest blob unknown error is supposed to apply to anything on the manifest endpoint, and somehow during the processing of over drying the spec, we referenced only the image manifest and not the other kinds of types and objects that are on the manifest endpoint. And so the spec needs to be opened up to correctly reflect that. And I think the original spec had been written that way as well.
Yeah, so I think where you're coming at this from, Steve-O, was that the spec itself never said that you had to. It said you should, but it never said you had to have every one of those objects up there in advance. And so we just need to clarify what the error code is on that. Is that correct?
Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, it doesn't say it now. With this change, we're just clarifying it. Like I think the spec says if you have a manifest, you should you should return manifest blob unknown or show errors when they're missing descriptors, right? We're saying like, oh, that definition was too narrow, because from the perspective of the distribution side, the manifest is anything that is uploaded to the manifest endpoint. it's not just the image manifest itself, right? So a manifest could be like a image index, it could be a Docker manifest list, it could be whatever we come up for artifacts or any kind of supported type of the registry that we use on that manifest endpoint. There's like a presumptive validation of that type, which we don't do for blobs, right? And then there's a presumptive check, so like other kinds of environmental checks, right? It might be like, oh, I can go look at the blobs that I have. I can look at, oh, like, hey, am I referencing a blob that has like a known vulnerability or something like that, right? So you can have extra validation on top of that. And in that case, you can return that manifest, blob unknown error.
Yeah, I guess from the OCI side, we can't say that you have to enforce it because we always said it's only a should.
I'm not arguing that we. I'm not arguing that we. I'm saying it may be enforced.
Yeah, yeah. And so from us at the spec level, we can't say that the validation must exist or anything else. I'm just also thinking through as a user that in case of all things, this is going to break when people start doing it on a massive level. But pros and cons.
I'm not saying that.
Yeah.
I'm saying may, not must.
Yeah. It was never a must before. And so we're just clarifying that it wasn't before applied to this scenario. So I think we're all on the same page. It's just I'm thinking through all the users that are going to have things break on them if this becomes more commonplace.
Well, I mean, this is the way registries already behave.
Yeah.
I mean, if there are registries that aren't doing it, like they allow you to, if there are registries that are supporting monolithic image pushes, and they're not doing this validation, they would allow uploading of invalid, like unpullable images, right?
Yeah, and this
the original use case is quite valid. It's from James Hewitt, right? He's saying like, oh, I want to make a registry where I only have like the blobs for a particular architecture. Like you should be able to build and configure a registry that does that, right? And the spec should allow that.
Yeah, should allow, but I'm also thinking of when we allow it or when it becomes more common, what breaks. Specifically, all my code breaks, but that's my problem to fix.
How does this spec change break your code?
I do deep copying of images across registries. And so if I hit a partial index out there, the copy will fail halfway through.
Yeah, but there's no change in that requirement today, right? Like you could have a registry that doesn't validate the presence of blobs and your deep copy could still fail.
Yep.
So I don't think there's any, I think this is just a clarification is what I'm saying.
Yeah, and I think I agree.
Okay.
Yeah,
cool.
I think this clarification is fine. I think the follow-up discussion is a lot more interesting, but I'm not objecting to this.
There's a lot of implications.
Yeah. Cool. So like I said, I didn't want to hog up too much time. The other one out there, I think it sounded like a lot of people in agreement with. It's just clarifying. I think there've been a handful of issues out there over the years. I didn't even go through and do a deep enough search of everything. But just to say that, if you have multiple index entries in a single index that match whatever you're looking for as a runtime, that you should pick the first one. And so that gives people the ability to extend an index with multiple things. For example, also out there, you might have an image that could be run, but you could also have an artifact. And from the index level, you can't tell the difference between an image and an artifact. They look the same. And so you could be able to potentially put some annotations or something like that in your index to say, this is the individual manifest I want to pull for a signature or an SBOM or something like that. And so that SBOM verifier would know to pull its specific one out of there. But the general runtime that doesn't know anything about all this crazy stuff we're throwing at it would just know I need to pull the first one out of the list. So I just wanted to clarify that point that I think was already verified in other discussions before, but was just never put in the spec. Did I describe that horribly?
I mean, the wording here seems reasonable. That is what, as far as I can tell, clients are doing today. The examples get to be a little bit more nuanced.
Yeah, I'm sure people find other ways to use this. I think there have been other discussions out there talking about runtimes that have different layer formats. And so you could push a manifest with one layer format and a different manifest with a different layer format. And then the runtime that knows to use that second layer format would know to pull the second manifest.
Yeah, this problem is surprisingly difficult. In general, this has been my recommendation for client implementation. So I don't see a problem with it being in the spec. I'm wondering if we should have it in less in there.
Say again, have a what?
Have an unless, like, so if multiple manifests match a client or runtimes requirements, the first matching entry should be used unless there's some overriding client policy or something like that. But I think maybe should is enough there to cover that.
I think that case you're talking about is covered by runtime's requirements.
Yeah,
Like if the runtime requirement is first, I will check for a layer that, a manifest that matches these criteria, and if that isn't found, I'll fall back to some other manifest by some other criteria.
Maybe the word, because runtime to me is like a specific part.
Yeah.
But I think we're using the term. So from this perspective of this spec, the runtime is the whole host environment. So I think I agree with you, Jason. Easy LGTM on this one, I think.
Yeah, and if you have better phrasing, feel free to propose it. I just kind of threw this out in a
No reason to
late
be
night kind of.
Yeah, no reason to bike shit on it. Is that enough maintainers? There's a linter error though.
The error looked like it was something unrelated. I didn't know what that was about.
It's unrelated and it's driving me crazy.
Yeah, we should fix that.
Okay, can we force merge?
Go.
No.
Yeah, no, we can force merge. I've already force merged a few. Go meta linter is like deprecated since 2 years. And it's going to take a little bit of rework to go to Golang CI lint.
Oh, linters.
Oh, happy times.
Every time I add a linter to a project, I'm like, this is a good idea. And then 2 years on. Type undefined. Here, we can't decorate that, can we? Okay.
So that was all I had. I think Josh, you're up next on the conformance.
Hello again. Sharing? Can you see? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So sorry if my emails have become essentially spam at this point, but just trying to get this all together. Thank you, Tianan, and there's been a few other people who have been willing to help with this. Super excited that it's like kind of all coming together. So there is some code that I snuck in here last week or early this week. And this is a simple page generator that looks at the folders in this repo and then creates a web page. And what's cool about it is this page is now completely dynamic based on what's in that repo. So you can see we have like open source and hosted, and everything that's under distribution spec v1.0, we're parsing all of this. And then if there's a file in here called product, if this says type distribution, that's open source. And the rest of this metadata is pulled out. And because we're using JUnit, we're actually able to parse that in Go and figure out which of the workflows in distribution that are supported. So you can see like Vanessa just uploaded this last night. And by going through the JUnit, we're able to see it supports pool push content discovery management. And also this version is not hard coded, it's being pulled out too. So once we get a 1.1, the process will simply be adding a v1.1 folder here and resubmitting for the same product that was for v1.0, and it will just show up as another column here. The other thing too is we're bringing in the actual test report into this site, so you can actually click through here now and see the actual test output all in the browser, as well as there's another file that people have to provide called README, and this just shows you how to actually reproduce those results. So that's pretty much it. That's all I have to say about it. But now we need for people to submit. I would love for this page to just have dozens of different registries, which we were testing before. I'm happy to help, put together some of these files, but I think it's probably best if the people responsible for the registry are the ones submitting it, because I'm not going to claim conformance for your registry, but I'm happy to help put together these submissions. That's pretty much all I have.
And we're discouraged from publicly shaming registries that don't pass the conformance by submitting stuff on their behalf.
Yeah, that's the great thing about this is everyone's green. You will actually receive a black X here. So if I think, like, for example, Docker Hub is not going to support this one. So it will show a black X. I decided black instead of red because red is bad. Black is fine.
That's pretty great.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So yeah, if nothing to discuss, like we just thank you everyone who Vince, Steve, who is offering to get involved in this. I'm hoping that we just get PRs coming in. We just need to encourage. I think the more that get added to this, the more encouraging it will be to get your registry on there.
Josh, I had a question. So do you get a conformance badge as a distribution provider? And if you're not, what does it take to be fully conformant? So do you allow, is it each of those sections? As long as you have one of them, you are conformant, or do you need all of them?
From the, after many conversations last year, I think that we decided pool is the only absolute required thing. People have different feelings about this, but I think it makes sense because you could be a read-only registry and still be an OCI product. So, and no, we don't have any type of badge. That's something I think we'd probably have to talk to like Linux Foundation legal about, which I don't have.
Yeah, we don't. I don't know that you need it. I just worked on Kubernetes conformance. So the analogs, a couple of things I saw in Kubernetes conformance: name squatting, people submitting, conformance results on behalf of other providers. So they had to put. I don't know if you've seen the Kubernetes stuff. They wrote a bot now that basically passes the whole thing, and you have to do all this verification pieces.
Wow.
Yeah, name squatting was a big one, and fabricated results.
Really, that's been an issue.
Yeah, so I'm not saying,
I guess,
we have to put the cart before the horse, but I guess, is there any check on, me saying, I own this registry, here's the results, and you know, actually validating that a maintainer
Yeah.
or the name of the registry at least matches.
It seems like, I don't know. It's definitely the point of this, so I don't want to make light of it, but getting people to sign up seems like the biggest priority for me right now. In the case of the open source ones, like maybe, and I don't want to put more work on the maintainers that just signed up for this, but we could try running the steps in the README. I don't know, maybe are you still on that team, Lachlan?
Yeah, I haven't participated in it. I built some conformance tests a while ago. They had conformance profiles, right? So that you could create in different platforms what contributed conformance. But, you know, I guess let's just leave it and see what happens and address problems if and when they come up. There may not be any issues. It may be just fine.
Okay. But I'm just saying if maybe you can put me in touch with that team, because there is probably stuff to learn there, but I just don't, like, we only have 3 on the list so far.
No,
so.
totally. Great. Yes. Thank you. I mean, it looks great. So we don't have to put, you know, any additional effort in. I was just thinking about other things that I'd seen before.
Awesome. Jason?
Yeah, I was going to say, especially I like the inclusion of reproduction steps. So if I see some registry that I think that claims to be conformant, but I think isn't, I can run the reproduction steps and see what's wrong and file an issue or shame them on Twitter or something like that.
If you're gonna lie about it, like, it's verifiable.
It's verifiable with some work. I mean, it's yeah. And even if I catch somebody being non-compliant, I would probably still have to fight them in the issue comments to, you know, agree with that. But I totally agree that, like, getting more of these is more important than adjudicating each and every one we have right now. That's not the problem.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe we do a thing like, if someone does find an issue with one of them, we give people like 15 days to resubmit working, or we remove it. Like, I think what's cool about this is this new list of maintainers. I think beyond that, like, figuring out access controls in OCI, like, I want to, like, come up with a more workable maintainership model. I know I'm going off your topic, but I think we should just be very clear about things.
Yeah, I think one of the things that Kubernetes did, it has a different number of conformance checks per version, and then the bot actually checks that the results match the number of conformance checks. So as long as the number of conformance checks change between versions, I don't know that it was fraudulent. I probably overspoke. It's copy and paste errors between versions, right? It's like, I just took the results from 1.0 and 1.1. It's like, hey, there are 3 more conformance checks in 1.1. Your results don't check out. So that's just something, I think that's the kind of math they run on Kubernetes. It's keep changing the number of conformances, and then version specific conformance numbers don't equal the same thing, so that you can run some lightweight validation.
That also encourages more conformance tests over time.
It does, and I think that was the behavior they were trying to encourage. So if you watch, it's going up by groups of, you know, tens to hundreds every release.
It's self-enforcing. Both sides need to get better over time. It's good.
Well, I'm freaking pumped. So thanks everyone for the support with this, and I hope to see this page flourish. I think I had another topic, but I put it. Oh, it is no. All right. Who's security release?
Oh, that was. I think that was me. I don't think I put my initials on it, but that was about effectively cleaning up the conversation about the security release that Tycho had said of if you're just pulling from master right now, then it still shows the prior release because the way we branched it. So I opened a PR to show a merge back on image spec and distribution spec, which introduces an ugly bubble in the Git branch history, but at least then people who are getting any projects that currently import from distribution or image spec for the simple Go structures will stop getting the Dependabot alerts. So it could be a pretty quick couple of LGTMs if folks think that it looks correct in those PRs. It's not a breaking change, it just introduces a bubble. It's not actually even a change because those commits are already in the main branch. It just shows that a tagged release is now in tracking in that main branch. So Dependabot alerts go away. So I think if we have a couple of people here on this call, please just click and LGTM that.
Does anyone understand the CI failures?
That's a separate topic, but you want to go there?
Well, maybe I'll add it to the end.
So yeah, that's it for the what PR. It's in the note. It's in the markdown. HackMD.
The distribution spec one, you've got the numbers.
Distribution is 309. Image spec is 878.
Oh no, I meant you have the LGTMs.
Okay. Do the thing. Oh, restore the branch.
Vince, should I move on?
Yes.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So one of the things for the last topic that I realize is people are testing conformance using the GitHub action, which we put together. I think we must have known we were doing this, but it was something I was unaware of. So Jason had put up a PR yesterday on conformance, and I wanted to validate it. So I pulled down Zot server, ran that, and basically saw that there was an issue in their test results. And I was confused because we had just gone through conformance with them. And it turns out that they are running against the GitHub action at main. The GitHub action at main is pulling a Docker image that is pushed to GitHub registry from distribution spec and locked to the 1.0 tests. So they're testing every change against the 1.0 spec and not necessarily what's in what's on the main branch, if that makes sense. So I'm wondering if that's the intended behavior, if the GitHub action should be locked, or if we want to enable people to test latest everything, should we in CI be pushing like a latest or main tag so that people can override that image when they're running the GitHub action? It was just a bizarre thing because I was talking to Rob and he's like, no, we're definitely, we're testing conformance pretty regularly. So there's just been a bunch of changes in the test suite since 1.0 that they're not validating.
Yeah, it sounds like it just needs to be updated whenever the test case is changed.
But the GitHub action should probably stay stable on the minor release, though. Do you think?
Yeah, on the tracked releases for a point release that somebody's running against, yes. But if you're
Okay.
if you're making a change in main, I think that's currently tagged to development. If they wanted to get a specific release that's already been published and approved, then they should be going off not main, but right, the release branch.
Well, let me share specifically what I just put in the Zoom chat. So the last line of this file, since this action YAML's on the main branch, it's pointing to this specific v10 image. And I'm wondering maybe that should say main, and then people could run, like we can cherry pick this onto, oh, I don't know. That image should be locked for the releases, but not for main, maybe? Does anyone have GitHub Actions experience with this?
So would it be, what do you think about adding like a parameter to the action so that they can choose whether or not to have it build, or even choose the tag that it pulls from? Like for me, if I wanted to test against main, I would not be surprised to see that GitHub action building a Docker image in order to run the conformance tests on the latest code.
Yes, well, we were doing that and it was slow, so we ended up using a pre-baked image.
Yeah, I think it should default to this. I think this is great, but having an option for users to be able to say, hey, I want to pull this from main and I want to build it, and I know that that's going to be slow, but I want the latest bleeding edge. Give me the tests.
Yeah.
How will this affect me? Right, the merged PR. Yeah, we probably need to do it slow on main.
Okay. We will make it happen. Go ahead.
My hesitation in there is main to me is whatever was last committed to the repo, and that might be a little too fast for me, but just like a V1 of whatever was the most recent version 1 would be better for me.
Yeah, maybe a V1 branch, because like I've seen other ones, like a lot of the GitHub provided ones have like a V1 or V2 on there. I'm not really seeing a lot of main.
Yeah, it's tricky.
Lucky
So you basically, you've got two choices here, right? One, you're trying to test a change to the test cases and whether or not that will pass. The other is you're wanting to change something and see how it's affected against the current main or some other version. So I guess whoever made the suggestion for selecting, that makes some sense when you're doing your own locals, your own little test buckets. But for whether or not we should merge a PR, it probably needs to be running against the current test bucket that would be built with the changes, right? Typically
merge for who to for like Zot to merge a PR.
Yeah.
Or a registry. Yeah, I agree. Yes.
Yeah, we can take it offline. Do it in chat or Signal.
We'll support both cases somehow. Lockie, did you have something?
No, I just think this is going to be really confusing for end users to consume, right? And what version of the test suite am I running against what version of the distribution? And what results do they yield, and how does that affect what ends up in that conformance website? So you either need a version test suites and lockstep them with versioned. You shouldn't be changing the conformance test suite ideally after a release is cut, but it sounds like that's not. We're adding tests.
Well, I think the way that you're saying it is how it is actually how it is.
Right.
The way that you're proposing is actually how it already is. And I'm trying to, should people not be testing the potentially broken main stuff until V1.1? That's what I'm
for conformance,
yeah,
it should be against the release, but for testing and checking what the changes are going to be, it should be against main. You need both.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'd say what Tianon said, just add a parameter to the GitHub action to say what version of
Yeah.
the test do you
To
want to run?
override it if you
Of
want
what
to.
branch to override, have default behavior against the match to the test suite, or whatever the branch is, and then you can override it with main if you want.
Okay, I agree. All right, I think we're all on the same page. By default, it should be V1, and you can optionally do bleeding edge. Okay, I yield.
So I think I threw that on the list there. Didn't even realize we got to that point. Just anything on the working group status, since that, I think that got approved, right? And so next steps, are there ways for community members to participate that aren't maintainers of that, and all those good questions?
Yeah, I mean, I think just the first part is, like, we did get the votes. That's awesome. We were going to tally them this morning, or tally them at this meeting, but that came in last night. So that's just awesome to get that. Phil, Vincent, as chairs, did you want to think about, like, we're also at an awkward point of the end of the year. I think we have to kind of figure out what are the next steps there.
I mean,
Yeah.
I think it's really up to, I mean, hopefully the TOB really steps back and just allows those who are interested to decide on all the practical matters, meetings, where you're going to put notes, recordings, decide where that fits in everybody's schedules and time zones. But to me, I assume that's kind of the next kind of practical matter, is just how do you get started and who's going to coordinate some of that. So yeah, I totally get that it's end of the year, so maybe it's going to be hard to pull off a whole lot, other than maybe figure out some of those things and get it kicked off in a few weeks, or January, if that makes more sense.
Lucky.
Yeah, I was just going to say we should try and get the administrative pieces out of the way, which is typically, setting up a repo for the work, figuring out when to schedule things, getting Zoom links set up, calendars, channels, because the idea is here that we carve out a space and a time for people that are interested, and anybody can participate. And that those named people on the proposal were the people at least being responsible for the scheduling and running the meetings and taking the notes and making sure that the conversations align with the charter and the stated charter. But I think getting the administration bits can certainly be done before the holidays, and I can take point with the other named folks on that on the proposal there to start that process. But I think the question to the TOB would just carving out a space, getting a repo, adding a set of maintainers that can check into that repo, and maybe just establishing, some, set of criteria about if somebody was to come and stumble across this repo out of the blue, making sure that they know that it's a work in progress. And I think the only other bits to the TOB is like reporting and any outcomes. How do you want interactions between the working group coming back to this group to say, hey, we've made a checkpoint or a milestone, or how do you want that communication to happen, which, might already be in the working group documents, but that's just something. What is the cadence that this working group needs to report progress back to the TOB is something, having worked on Kubernetes steering, we had to make sure that any working groups were meeting milestones and showing a progress towards the charter, and were making progress in line with the charter there. But we don't have to, do too much straight up. I think just getting a place to at least publish when the meetings are, working on when the meetings that work for most people, getting the Zoom recordings, calendar, all that administration bits is probably the first bit. So I'm happy to work with the people and take point on the named folks if anybody else wants to participate too. But I guess the question would be carving out a space in either a separate repository called working group proposal, and then we can go from there.
Specific on that, do we need just one repository, or do you need more than one for spec versus code or anything like that?
It would be my advice just to set up my proposal, just to set up the place for the initial meetings to take place, and then figure out exactly what we're asking as part of the working group. Because I don't know, spec versus code. I can't answer that right now without, the working group answering it. So it's just like, can we at least put up a README, and it could be under TOB right now. Here's the working group. Here's where to find it. Needs to be discoverable. And then we can figure out repos later if that's a better outcome. If you want, the working group README in the top level TOB repository. I don't mind that either.
I mean, without complicating it, this is one of the things we talked about is how does OCI want to just start categorizing working groups and capture that?
And my advice is don't create process until process is needed. That's just my stance. So start to have the conversations, and then we figure out the process. So let's, not being a TOB member, that's just my advice, because we can go and create all this policy and procedures, but it doesn't actually help people start having conversations about moving that discussion forward. So I'd be lightweight, move fast until we need, until proven process is needed.
Yeah, that approach is good, and I assume kind of that initial thought of like at least having a repo for administrative details. Sure, we could do it inside the TOB, but that quickly could get messy if a second or a third, start to pop up. So I guess I always forget who has rights to what in our GitHub org. So offline, we'll figure out how to make sure the right people get access in the next few days. And maybe Vincent knows more than I do about open containers, the org permissions.
Spoiler, I do not.
I feel like we always end up asking Chris or somebody to muck with things.
Everybody refresh. Who has the settings button?
It varies, and there's some that I've thought that I do have access to and don't, and vice versa. I have the settings button in image spec.
Who can create new repos? I think that's what kind of.
I was about to say new repos I do not. That's an Andy and Amy thing. Distribution spec, but not every. This is part of a thread that Josh brought up. As far as like getting consistency across the repos, is that not everything that we have maintainers of, the maintainers don't all have rights to those repos. Like as far as like GitHub org and teams, that's kind of not quite a sink hole of a conversation, but it's effectively by Phil saying we take that offline, that basically needs its own session of like getting Amy or Chris involved, because there's even been times when I've pinged Amy for something, then she has to get Chris involved.
Yeah, it looks like there's teams in place for everything. There's teams in place for everything, but we just need to put the right people in there.
So it sounds to me like the best minimal option here right now is figure out where those discussions are going to take place, where that community is meeting and talking about this thing, and when, and get a file in the TOB repo and figure out the details later.
Yeah, that's what I was just thinking. Like like as far as what repos might be needed, we can open a request for that. But I'd say reuse this Zoom thing as long, because we really only use this Zoom thing once a week. Have a Slack channel.
I think one of the questions will be for the doodle is the people that can't attend at this time. Are there, what international time do we have to account for? But
Oh, yeah, I think that.
so we can just, if we can get a doodle up that accounts for that, or
Sure.
to see who is interested to participate more real time, then that would be great.
Okay, I think I can create a bomb, since we love bombs, of everything that we need to do. And I'll propose it to the TOB folks. I'm working with the folks on the working group proposal at the moment. And then you can, naming a repo and where we put things. I threw some examples of other working group models. I'm not saying Kubernetes is the canonical one, but that's just a model we could follow. I pasted some links in chat of how they do it. So yeah. I'll communicate in Slack with the team and we'll just go from there. Sound okay?
Sounds great. Yep.
Yeah, all right, thanks.
I think at least 5 minutes for John to talk about CI failures.
Is that enough?
I've never completed CI failures in 5 minutes. Let's go, John.
No,
Start the timer.
it took me 30 minutes to get demoralized that it was bigger than I went down the path of of seeing why it was broken, that it was a trail of tears, especially because the way that Go MetaLinter worked is that it fetched a bunch of things all at once. So as some of those linters started to not work on older versions of Go, and then MetaLinter itself is outdated. So it's just a little bit of like, what would it look like to have the same kind of test matrix on whatever versions of Golang? I don't really think we've always just had kind of an informal trailing of last few versions of Go. No like industry standard of like, we have to support back to Go 1.4 or something crazy like that. And then just take a new dive at keeping that working with Golang CI lint, I guess. That's just, I mean, I'm actually free after this call if somebody wants to just pair and work on that, not keep everybody tied up. So
I can make.
sweet. So we don't have to make it a topic per se, just
Works for me. I was hoping someone else had done a deeper dive than I, so I'm glad you have.
Sorry, I got distracted. Are we gonna just upgrade the linter?
effectively. I mean, upgrade, replace.
Well, yeah, with Golang CI or something like that.
Golang CI lint, yep.
Yeah.
It especially with projects like this, it makes you feel the onus of having to stay active on keeping things like hot, because as soon as they cool down and things get deprecated, then nothing is meant to be built at a point in time in the history.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much. I mean, there's always various topics we could talk about, but does anybody else have anything pressing in the next 5 minutes?
Is this the last call before the year? Or are we going to do?
That's a good question. I'll still be around for 2 more weeks before I really unplug.
Sounds good. 2 more weeks.
I mean, yeah, that's me. I'm not.
No, I know. I was just creating a schedule.
Schedule.
Did we have any update on the extension proposal?
I posted some comments on the PR that Tasia made on my PR. I'm not opposed to it at all. I think there was just a few curiosities of why when breaking it out into like a discover endpoint. I think the original reason why I was thinking that it would just be like at the base of calling the extension like as its own path or endpoint was just that I don't know. It was fine. It's a fine pattern. Just a few of those things. If we're introducing effectively like a discover command, then is that another pattern that you'd want things to emulate versus just fetching the base path and not making it its own verb in some kind of an API?
That was my question on there, right? Because we arrived on ext discover, but then in the thing below we have namespace ext discover, or like namespace ext component. I think it should be probably operation, but how do we want to do that? Like, do we want to have a namespace with a bunch of extensions under them, or?
Right. There's one. I mean, like the arguments to and against. So arguably, and I think Jason, you've even raised this point, is that if you're working with a registry or you have a tool that's just going to expect an extension to be in place, and it's not even going to look to discover it first. It's not going to make a client's not going to make a call before it checks that extension, unless it's some kind of like variable JSON schema that it has to arrive at. So when we were going from the Docker v1 to v2 APIs, we introduced that v2 API, and it was like some clients would hit it just to see like, does it support v2 before it would guess, and then eventually they just skip that step to say like, if I can go ahead and frame up the call to the whole v2 thing, and if it returns not found, then I can assume that it's a different API. So it's I think very seldom that people would even hit a discovery endpoint, much less that it would need to make its own verb for it. Like just, it can ping that ext path, just to see, does this thing even support extensions? And that path itself could probably return a JSON object. So it's one of those, like, I'm not opposed to having a discovery endpoint, just.
Well, hold on. There's a conversation. So.
I was
Sorry,
hold on. So
I'll put some context to it. So
there's a difference between namespace and repository name. So we're talking about the namespace of the extension, not the repository name is already there, and this would be under the repository name. There's another thing that we're calling namespace in reference to extensions.
The question is, this is part of the problem with the catalog API. This is one of the reasons why I wanted to make sure we bring that back, as just saying it's reserved, but it's if I only have permissions to a sub portion of the registry, I need to be able to have an extension on that, that discoverability there. So it's just the root was part of the problem, it's great to have stuff with the root because I might want to search across all repos, but I might have an extensibility point on a sub portion of the overall registry.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. But the question on the PR changes from Tasia is, are we going with 3 components, underscore namespace / extension / component, or are we going with 2 components, which is underscore extension name / operation? I suggested, because that would be closer to what we were doing with the Discover extension.
I like the latter.
You like the two components?
Yep.
2 path components. Yeah.
Namespace plugin, and then anything else is an argument. It's not a separate path entry.
Yeah. That's pretty flat. So we don't have hierarchy. We just have namespace component. And to me, that keeps things simple. Can anybody think of a reason of where we'd want to carve that out more explicitly? I think that would be the way to put this down. Does that make sense, Steve?
Yeah, Sajid, I'm turning to you for how the different permission models work.
So that means we would have to kind of like make referrers, like what would that look for one API as an example? Right now we have something like just as an example, it would be ORAS artifacts referrers. Are we saying we just go with artifact referrers or ORAS referrers? That's if it's only 2 parts.
Yeah, that's the suggestion. And
That's-
you could hyphenate if you wanted to have.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Right,
I'm not opposed to 1 part or 2 parts. It's just a matter of some consistency that we can agree on.
Yeah. And then, so yeah, and the reason I like the smaller path components is when you get the repository name and these path components all together, you can end up with a really large, confusing, hard to parse path. And so this kind of forces query parameters on the actual path, either into a document that's posted along with the request or into just get query parameters. So I think that's a better model for these extensions. And I guess I'm just reiterating what we were talking about before, but hopefully that's clarifies everything.
It makes sense. We can get rid of 1 part in that. It keeps it simpler.
Okay. Vincent, did that clarify your concern, or were you talking more about the difference between registry level and repository level extensions?
I had not gotten to the registry versus repository. I was just talking about the initial extension path and discovery. No, I think that's. I'll look back at it, and I think sometimes conversations break down into certain nuance that it'll take a little bit of a review just to think through the whole thing again, since we kind of, I think it not quite fishtailed, but just has kind of gone in 2 different directions, making sure it's not gotten too spread thin of a conversation. But anyhow, we're at time. I'll call it for this recording, and then those that want to check on CI stuff, we can stay on. So good chatting with everybody.
Thanks. Have a great one.